And we are back. Welcome to what is probably my favourite video of the year. It is time to make my Premier League table predictions for the 2024-25 season. Once again, trying to figure out who is going to finish in every single place in the Premier League table from 20 all the way up to the champions in number 1 spot. Now, for those of you who don't know how I do this on a points scoring system based on where each team finishes compared to where I predicted them. So, for example, if I bring up last year's table, you will see that I scored 46 points because we were able to accurately predict 4 teams in the correct position, which scored a total of 0 points, 1 point for 1 position out, etc., etc. And then obviously Manchester United and Bournemouth, I got 7 places out, meaning that my score for last year was 46 points. The aim of the game is to score as few points as possible. So last season was by far my best season prediction so far, scoring 46, whereas in the previous years I got 85 and 70. This is going to be my 4th year of doing these table predictions. So before we get into it, if you haven't done so already, please do consider dropping a like on this video and subscribing to the channel if you're new around here, because weekly Premier League reactions will be coming at you from Friday morning. So let's get into it now, and we're going to discuss everything that we've got coming up for you. We are starting off by saying that if you wish to take part in the FUTMob Premier League Challenge and take on my table prediction, you can do so with the link in the description of this video. That will allow you to then create your own Premier League prediction, join with the league code on your screen, and then at the end of the season, you will see if your prediction ended up being any better than mine. And as for the week-to-week predictions, I am running my own Super 6 Predictions Mini League this year. Again, code is on screen for you now. Link will be available in the description and in the pinned comment of this video. So if you want to see if you can test out your prediction knowledge up against mine, feel free to check out both the FUTMob League Predictor and the Sky Sports Super 6 Prediction Mini League. And without any further ado then, let's talk about how we're going to be doing this Premier League table prediction. We will be starting off with the bottom 3, which will be obviously the 3 sides that are then going to be going down, in my opinion. From there, we will talk about the sides that I believe are going to be in trouble. I think those sides are going to range from 17th to 12th. From 11th to 9th, I reckon these teams are going to be just your bog standard mid-table. I don't think they're going to be in any danger of getting relegated. I also think they could potentially push maybe like the Europa Conference League space when we get to the latter end of the season. From there, we then have the sides that I believe could challenge. And when I say could challenge, I mean predominantly for the European places, but potentially 1 or 2 of them could potentially challenge the title winners. And then, of course, number 1 will be reserved for the champions spot. So that is how we're going to be running it. That's how I think the table is going to be broken up by the end of this season. And like I say, don't forget to check out the FUTMob and the Super 6 links so you can get involved yourselves. And now let's do it. Starting off with the team that I believe is going to finish in 20th place for this season, and that is Southampton. Now, what I'm going to do is a little bit of an extra for this year, is I've got bullet pointed reasons for everything as to why I have picked this side for the relevant position that they are in. Bearing in mind, of course, that certain things like the transfer window not closing until the end of the month would potentially affect how these things end up. I'm recording this on the 13th of August, so I'm recording this the Tuesday night before the Premier League starts on the Friday. So a couple of things could still happen in the next few days. Injuries, managers. I mean, Lopetegui literally left Wolves on the last day before the season started last time out. So what I've written for Southampton is that they were relegated bottom 2 years ago. They've obviously got themselves back promoted. They did that via the playoffs. They also had the most possession of any side in the Championship last season. However, they were the 14th side for least goals conceded, i.e. they were the 10th side for goals conceded, meaning they actually conceded an awful lot of goals last season in the Championship. And when you reflect that they have a lot of possession in the Championship and they're still conceding goals, the likelihood is that in the Premier League they're not going to get that much possession and they're going to be even more vulnerable to conceding. Yes, they did have that highest goal contribution in the Championship last season in Adam Armstrong, but outside of that, I don't really see a lot going for Southampton this season. As I've also put, it's Russell Martin's first season as a Premier League manager. He's only ever done Championship before. Obviously, he was a Premier League player with Norwich City, but very limited experience. They have made some decent signings in the transfer window, but ultimately, I think it's going to be straight back down for Southampton. For me, they don't have the credentials to survive in this division this season. In 19th, I'm going for another of the promoted sides. That is Ipswich Town. They did it a completely different way. They have managed to secure back-to-back promotions to the Premier League from League One. They also scored the most goals in the Championship last season, which is quite a good achievement for them. They were also able to stave off competition for their manager, Kieran McKenna. He is now on a massive contract, which puts him, I believe, 8th on the highest paid managers in the Premier League. And when you consider how many big sides there are in the Premier League right now, for Kieran McKenna to be the 8th most paid, that really is some sort of statement. But ultimately, they've not really done anything else in this transfer window. Yes, they've made a couple of signings, but I look at that squad and it very much is a Championship side. They've also got Man City and Liverpool as their first 2 games in the Premier League. Don't get me wrong, after that, they've got quite a nice run of fixtures, but I think it's going to be a rough start for them. I think it's going to be a bit of a reality hit for them. And as this season progresses, again, I just think ultimately, unless they make some big signings in the next couple of weeks or have a very good January, I think it'll be straight back down to the Championship for Ipswich Town. And then finally, rounding off the sides of which I think will get relegated, I'm going to go for Leicester City. I've got all 3 promoted sides going back down. Now, Leicester were rather surprisingly relegated 2 years ago, finishing 18th in the table back then. They also had a very good start to life in the Championship. As expected, they basically still had their Premier League team down in the Championship, but they only won it by 1 point from Ipswich. And due to the circumstances surrounding their relegation and the squad that they had, there is still rumours going around at the moment that Leicester could be hit with a points deduction. So that's one of the reasons why I've got them in 18th, because if they do get hit with a points deduction, I think they definitely will be going down. But even if they don't get that points deduction, they've lost their manager to Chelsea. They've lost their best player to Chelsea. Their new manager coming in, who I rate, to be fair, I had to mention it though, Steve Cooper came in. He was sacked by Nottingham Forest last season. So he's not done great in the Premier League. I do rate him as a manager, but he's got a massive job on his hands. Leicester have done okay in the transfer window, but again, I look at their squad, I look at their style of play. Is it going to be enough to keep them in the Premier League? I certainly think they've got the best chance of the 3 promoted sides, but like I say, I'm not completely convinced. There's still rumours they could be getting hit with a points deduction as well. And ultimately, I think the safest place to put Leicester is in the relegation zone. So for me, it will be all 3 promoted sides making their way back down to the Championship. That means it is time to talk about the remaining Premier League clubs from last season. And the side that I think is going to be in most trouble this season is Brentford. Now, they obviously finished 16th last season. Again, they've not really done much in the transfer window other than signing Igor Thiago, who has now picked up an injury that will see him out until January. Couple that with the fact that they've got Ivan Toney potentially leaving either to another Premier League team or some suggesting even Saudi Arabia. If they lose him as well, yes, they're about to sign Fabio Carvalho, but they didn't play great last season. When Toney came back into the side, they didn't improve. So I think this could be a really long season for Brentford. I think they'll stick with Thomas Frank. I think they have a lot of faith in Thomas Frank as a manager, but really tough opening fixtures. And I say that in regards to the fact that it's like a complete polar opposite. All of Brentford's first 5 or 6 away games are against the best teams in the Premier League. Their home fixtures are a little bit nicer, but this early on in the season, if you don't hit the ground running, you are in trouble. And I can see Brentford dropping points in some of those easier games in those first 3 weeks and then ultimately losing all of those tough away fixtures at the start of the season. That could really set the tone for the remainder of their season. And if they have a poor start, I think that would increase the chances of Ivan Toney leaving before the transfer window slams shut. So for me, it's going to be a long season for Brentford. I've got them in 17th. In 16th, I've gone for AFC Bournemouth, a side that I have said would get relegated the last 2 seasons. So a slight improvement from me this season. They obviously start the season in the number 1 spot, as they always do, because alphabetically they are AFC Bournemouth. So right now they will sit top of the Premier League. How long that will last, I don't really know. Obviously, the big news around Bournemouth is that Solanke has now been sold to Spurs. They've got a lot of money in for him. So hopefully for their sake, they can sign a quality forward to give their chances of survival a big boost. But I think the loss of their most important player is going to be massive for them. Iraola did a great job last season. Getting them 12th is a fantastic finish for Bournemouth. But did they overachieve? Potentially. Couple that again with the fact that they were no higher than 14th for goals scored and goals conceded, i.e. they were 14th for total number of goals scored, and I think they were 15th for number of goals conceded, i.e. they conceded the 15th most number of goals. Not good look for them, and losing their top goal scorer and their joint top assister to Spurs leaves them in real trouble, in my opinion, this season. They're a well-drilled team, they play good football, but without a star striker, it could be another long season for AFC Bournemouth. Speaking of long seasons, next up it is Everton, who obviously finished 15th last season with an 8 points deduction added on to them. Now, there's a lot of rumours yet again circulating that they haven't got their books in order. The takeover did not go through in the end, so we could be seeing another points deduction levied at Everton this season. If that happens, they could finish even lower than where they did last season, even though I have put them where they finished last season. The other issue is they do not score goals. I've got it on there. They were 19th for goals scored last season, and their top scoring player was Abdoulaye Doucouré, who missed half of the season through injury. The only real good news for them going into this season is that they were second for clean sheets behind Arsenal, and so far they have managed to keep Jared Branthwaite in the defence. They've also signed Jake O'Brien, who I think is a very good signing for them. So if they can keep their defensive outlay in place, I think that'll be enough to keep them up. I can see Everton getting a lot of draws this season. I don't see them picking up a lot of wins. They've also sold Amadou Onana to Aston Villa, which is another big loss for them in that midfield. And look, they've done some business in the transfer window. I think Lindstrom is a good signing for them. But ultimately, again, I don't see this being any higher than where I've got them. 15th for me for Everton. Potentially another relegation scrap on the hands for the Toffees. In 14th, I'm going to go for Wolverhampton Wanderers. Again, where they finished last season. And unfortunately, again for them, it's just been another summer where their best players have left. Most notably, of course, Pedro Neto, again to Chelsea. More on them shortly. But on top of that as well, 16th for top scorers, 15th for clean sheets. They don't score a lot. They concede a lot. They've let their best players go. They've not signed any major players in replacements for the players they've let go. And if it wasn't for Gary O'Neill, I did Wolves to get relegated last season. If it wasn't for Gary O'Neill, I think they probably could have been. Now they're losing more key players, granted players that did have injury issues last season. I can't see them improving from where they were last season. Again, 3 weeks left in the transfer window. Could change that. Wolves have a very good record of bringing through talented young players. And they do have some talented young players already in their starting lineup. And no doubt will sign more. But I think it'd be a real surprise to see Wolves get any higher than where they got last season. And like I say, I can see it being a relegation scrap for them this season as well. Up into 13th, I have got Brighton and Hove Albion, who at one point I actually had in the relegation zone for this video. But after seeing how well they've done in pre-season, I've put them at 13th. They struggled towards the back end of last season with a bunch of injuries. Injuries that certain players still haven't got over. Obviously, Roberto De Zerbi then left for Marseille, and there were rumours he was going to take 2 or 3 players with him. So far, that hasn't happened, but they have lost their most important player, in my opinion, in that man Grob, Pascal Gross, who has been sold to Borussia Dortmund. Also, their new manager, Fabian Herzler, I can never say his name properly, he is only 31 years of age. Yes, he did get a second division Bundesliga side, St. Pierre, I believe it was, promoted to the Bundesliga last season. But that is a massive risk from Brighton. It fits their model down to the ground, don't get me wrong. Getting a 31-year-old manager in suits the Brighton model completely. But he is very unproven, he is very raw, and is likely to make mistakes. That said, their pre-season has been absolutely fantastic, and that is why I've put them 13th. They are unbeaten in pre-season. They have made some good new signings. Most notably, it looks like Minte has been a great signing from Newcastle. Had a good season at Feyenoord last year. He's come in and hit the ground running in pre-season. And like I say, they're unbeaten in pre-season. Welbeck's been scoring. João Pedro's been scoring. Mitoma's back from injury. He's been scoring. So, could be positive signs for Brighton. But they've yet to be adequately tested. They've got some interesting opening fixtures, it has to be said. So we'll see how they get on in them. But for me, I could still see them struggling if it all starts falling apart and the injuries start piling up once again. Finally, for the teams that I think are going to be scrapping it out for the relegation places and nothing more than mid-table at best, I have got Nottingham Forest, which some people might be surprised that I've put them this high, but mainly it's to do with that last point I've put in my notes there, which is statistically, they have the easiest opening run of fixtures in the Premier League this season, and that is due to where sides finished last season, plus promoted sides coming in, home and away fixtures, etc., etc. Statistically, for the first 5 fixtures in the Premier League this season, Nottingham Forest have the easiest run. They've got all of their key players fit. They have not lost any of their key players. They've also made a lot less signings than they normally do. So it looks like they're backing Nuno Espirito Santo. He's putting together a good side. I do kind of like the signing of Elliot Anderson. I do think they overpaid for him a little bit. They've still got their core attacking line fit and available. They've not lost key defenders. And look, I think they could have a good season this season. I think it's been a bit of a struggle for them the last few years. They've obviously had a points deduction as well. That is something that I don't think could happen again this time around. I think they've got their books sorted, but they are going to have to address the issues that I have outlined there, which is they didn't get any higher than 15th for goals scored, goals conceded, or possession. So they don't score a lot, they concede a lot, and they don't have a lot of possession. So that's what they're going to be working on. But with the players they've got available to them for these first few fixtures, I think they could make a really solid start. And if their start is as good as I expect it to be, then I think they'll end up being safe by the end of the season. But we'll see. I've still got them in the in-trouble zone. But for me, Nottingham Forest are the least likely of these sides to go down this season. That then brings me on to the 3 sides that I think are going to be bog standard mid-table. But if they really get it right, you could see them challenging for European places come the end of the season. And in 11th place, I have got Crystal Palace. 1 place lower than where they finished last season. And that is no disrespect to them whatsoever. That is purely because of the quality of the teams that I've still got to place above them, and the fact that they have sold Michael Elise, and the fact that Mark Gahey could be going to Newcastle. Eza still has a release clause of 60 million. Fulham are also now in deep talks to re-sign Joachim Andersen, which would be a huge loss to them. If they lose Gahey and Andersen, and Eza and Elise, I think Crystal Palace could be in some more trouble than they actually already are. But I've got them in 11th. Because since Oliver Glasner took over, they would be in the top 4. They played that well on the back end of last season. And obviously Elise was a big part of that. But they've signed Daichi Kamada, who was Oliver Glasner's star player back at Eintracht Frankfurt. They've also signed Ismail Assar, who is a very good attacking winger in the Premier League. We've known that before. And there's even talks of Wilfried Zaha coming back to Crystal Palace on loan again. And like I say, as things stand, they still have Gahey, they still have Eza, they still have Anderson, they still have Mitchell, they still have Munoz, and they've got a striker in Jean-Philippe Mateta who narrowly lost out at the Olympics, but was one of the players of the tournament at the Olympics, scored I think it was 5 goals in 5 games, and he had the highest shot conversion rate of any player in the Premier League last season with 34%. To put that in perspective, Alexander Isak got 25% shot conversion, and Erling Haaland got around 22-23% last season. So they've got a clinical forward up front who is going to be sharper than any other player in the Premier League going into the start of this season after doing so well at the Olympics. So I still think Crystal Palace are going to do well. Obviously, if they lose the remainder of their key players over the next few weeks, it could see them drop into that in-trouble zone. But for me, they are going to be distinctly mid-table. Alongside Fulham, who finished 13th last season, sold Palinha, and so far have only signed Emile Smith-Rowe, which, when you think about it, would suggest they'd probably end up finishing lower than 13th. But again, they've had a very good pre-season. Smith-Rowe has come in and scored in his first pre-season game. They only lost 1 game out of, I think it was 4 or 5 in pre-season. They've played well. They have Manchester United away in their opening Premier League fixture. And then they have got some really, really good fixtures. I spoke about Nottingham Forest being the statistically best group of fixtures. Fulham are 3rd, Chelsea are 2nd, and we'll get to them, obviously, like I said, shortly. So I think if Fulham have a good start to the season, if they can sign 1 or 2 more players before the end of this transfer window, I think they'll be well set for a good season. They've got a good manager. They've got a good group of players. Yes, they do need to replace Palinha. But if they get the right man to replace him, I can see Fulham having a very good season, and I've got them in 10th place. On to 9th, we have got West Ham United, who are the side that finished the best of the rest last season, and I've got them to be best of the rest this season. I very nearly put West Ham 8th, and the side that I did put 8th, I almost put 9th. But I have still put West Ham 9th because there are so many unknowns going into this season. In my opinion, so far West Ham have won the transfer window. The signings they've made, Wan-Bissaka at right back, Todibo and Kilman at centre back, Guido Rodriguez in midfield, Crescencio Somerville on the wing, Nicholas Fulkrug up front. What a bunch of signings that is. That is definitely all of those players get into West Ham's starting lineup and could see them make the step up. And that's what it's about. It's about making the next step. They got 9th last season. David Moyes has left. They replaced him with Lopetegui. And they've built him a side of players better than the players that they already had in those positions. So that gives them the platform to progress to those European places once again. My only concern is that's an awful lot of signings, and Lopetegui did struggle at Wolves. So it's not a great look for them, and that's why I've not put them any higher than 9th, because it could just all completely fall apart. Speaking of that, they only won 1 game in pre-season, because these players have so far struggled to gel, and they've got some very tough opening fixtures. So watch this space. It could all come crumbling down for West Ham, but I think with the signings they've made, they'll have enough quality to get themselves at least where they were last season, if not even higher. At this point, I would, of course, normally move on to the sides that I think will be competing for the European places and could potentially challenge for the Premier League title. However, what I'm going to do instead is jump straight to first place, because first place will be Manchester City. And it will be Manchester City. And I would be shocked if it's not them again. I know a lot of people are tipping Arsenal to pip them. I know a lot of people are saying that Liverpool under Slot could come in and pip them. I've seen a lot of people saying all these other teams that I've got between 2nd and 8th, for one reason or another, could beat Manchester City to the title this season. But they've won the last 4. They are the most likely to win 5 in a row. Yes, the likes of De Bruyne and Kyle Walker are another year older. Yes, Julian Alvarez has gone to Atletico Madrid. Yes, outside of Savinho, they have not made any major signings so far. However, their reserves won the Community Shield. They still have the biggest group of world-class players ever assembled outside of maybe the current Real Madrid side, but obviously the Champions League is another story for another day. And ultimately, they're Manchester City. And this is what they do. They win the Premier League. They grind everyone else down. And eventually, they end up winning it. The only reason I can see them not winning it is those 115 charges, with the trial set to start next month. And if the charges are come through, who knows what could happen. They could be thrown out of the Premier League by Christmas. They could be relegated out of existence. They could be given a big enough points deduction that it guarantees they get relegated at the end of the season. Who knows? But as things stand, if you really think that Manchester City aren't going to win the Premier League, let me know in the comment section why they won't win the Premier League on a purely footballing basis. If you think it's because of the 115 charges, whatever. But if you have any genuine reasons why you don't think City are going to win it again, let me know down in the comment section. Because for me, I just don't see it happening. So for me, I'm going to put Manchester City at first. And now we'll talk about this pack of teams that will be trying to hunt them down. In 8th place, I have gone for Tottenham. 5th place last season. But the second half of last season, in my opinion, I think Tottenham under Ange Postecoglou got a bit found out. The high line, the balls in behind. Yes, they had injuries to key players, but ultimately they became very predictable. So they're going to need to do something a little bit different if they're going to have as good a season as they did last season. Now, they did have the second most possession. I've put that on there because I think that is worth noting. I don't think many people associate Tottenham with a possession-based team, but outside of Manchester City, Tottenham had the most possession in the Premier League last season. So that does need to be applauded because that's not an easy thing to do at this level. And they've spent massive money on Archie Gray and Dominic Solanke, who could change their team. Archie Gray, young, raw, talented, goes straight into that Spurs midfield, and Solanke gives them the striker that they didn't have last season. Personally, I think they've spent a little bit too much on Solanke, but I think he's a quality striker, and I think he is guaranteed goals for Tottenham this season. Not only that, they've also moved on the likes of Højbjerg and a couple of others. Ryan Sessegnon, Perisic is off the books. Basically what I do call deadwood players. Players that barely played, get them off the wage bill, streamline the squad and get them ready for the new season. What's working against them is, like I've already said, I think people have found out their style of play. They've also got some really, really tough opening fixtures at the start of this season. and they'll be playing Europa League football, which is never fun for these teams that are competing to get into the Champions League. They don't like playing Thursday and Sunday, Thursday and Sunday, Thursday and Sunday. Let's not forget that there are going to be extra matches in Europe this season, and I think that will start to take a toll over the course of the next few months. So we'll see. I've got Tottenham as the bottom side in this battle for the top 4 and the title, but who knows? I think it could be so close between all of these teams. In 7th, I've got Chelsea, the enigma caught in a hurricane, as they said in that James Bond film, because who knows what's going on at Chelsea? Does anyone really know? They finished 6th last season, where I predicted them to finish, where most people thought was an incredible achievement. So they upped and sacked Mauricio Pochettino and got in Maresca, who's only had one proper season as manager, which was in the Championship, where with a Premier League team, he only won the Championship by 1 point. He is so unproven, it's unbelievable. Not to mention their transfer window yet again has been absolutely bonkers. Deals in and deals out. The Omarodian deal's fallen through. There's talk the Conor Gallagher deal might be falling through. They're talking about João Felix coming back. They've signed Pedro Neto for stupid money. They've signed 4 goalkeepers. They now have 8 registered goalkeepers for this Premier League season as things stand. They've got a lot of players with injury issues. They'll be in the Conference League, so they'll be playing Thursday, Sunday, Thursday, Sunday. Who knows what's going to happen with Chelsea? They could win the league. They could be in the bottom half. I've just gone smack bang in the middle and said, at the end of it all, they've got enough quality players to still compete for European places. And I think they'll end up just about there. Honestly, they are the hardest team to predict this season, Chelsea. If you get the Chelsea prediction right, fair play to you, because there is just so much going on at that football club right now. I honestly don't know what is going to happen at them this season. In 6th, I've got Newcastle, who I did really want to put higher, and the biggest reason for that is they have no European commitments. Because Manchester United won the FA Cup, Chelsea got knocked into the conference. We mentioned that Newcastle got knocked out of Europe altogether. That could end up being the biggest blessing in disguise in the history of football. Because Newcastle have a very talented team. We know how good they are. With no European commitments 2 years ago, they qualified for the Champions League. They've held on to Isak. They've held on to Bruno. They've held on to Joelinton. They've held on to Trippier for now. They've still got good players. They could be signing Mark Gahey. They have got all the tools they need to get themselves back into the Champions League. And like I said, the benefit of that no European commitment is those extra 2 weeks that are taking place this year. In the Champions League, Europa League and Europa Conference League, it will be 8 fixtures per team rather than 6. When you consider the teams that will be playing on Thursdays, it's even more of a strain. That could leave the door open for Newcastle to get back into the top 4. However, I just think the quality of the squads of the sides that I've got to finish above them are the reason why I've left Newcastle in 6th. But again, for a large part of this summer, I have had Newcastle in my top 4. But I just think it's going to be 6th place for them this season. We shall see. In 5th, I've gone for the side that I thought was going to finish 5th last season, which was Aston Villa. Obviously, a great season for them last season, qualifying for the Champions League for the first time since the year after they won it. They won the European Cup in 1982. They then got knocked out in 1983 and have not been in the European Cup or the Champions League since. It was the European Cup when they last played it. It is now the Champions League, so they're playing the Champions League for their first ever time. But they have seriously strengthened their squad. They've got Onana in from Everton. They've got Barkley in. They've got Illing Jr. Yes, they've lost Douglas Luiz, but I really like the signings that they've got in midfield. They're on about signing Getroida, who I think would be a fantastic signing for them. They've signed Maatsen from Chelsea. Great signing for them. And they are building a side that is looking like it can compete for the top 4 and compete in the Champions League once again. So I've put them 5th. Definitely can see them finishing 4th. And like I said, I was so close to putting Newcastle above them and the sides that I'm about to put above them in and around them. There is so little to choose from between all of these sides. There really is. But I've gone for Aston Villa in 4th because in the first Champions League place, I have gone for Manchester United. And you'll see it there on the notes. One of the biggest reasons why I've put Manchester United in 4th is because I'm a Manchester United fan. And I do believe that we can get top 4 this season. So as a Manchester United fan that believes that we can get top 4 this season, I'm going to put us in the top 4. We're already into an injury crisis where Højlund's injured, Yoro's injured, Luke Shaw's injured, Malasia's injured. There's on about Other players potentially missing as well. I've already forgotten because there's so bloody many of them. But we're looking like we're going into another big season with injury crisis. We've spent a lot of money. We spent 60 million on Euro, and he's now obviously injured. We're about to spend 50 million on De Ligt. We're about to spend 20 million on Mazraoui. They're on about obviously spending upwards of 50 to 70 million on either Ugart or Frenkie de Jong. It could be 15 million on Sanderberg or Sofian Amrabat. We're still yet to see. And we spent 40 million plus on Joshua Zirkzee. So we've spent a lot of money, but I think we have improved the team. The biggest problem for us last season was that defensive record. Onana made more saves than any other Premier League goalkeeper last season. If we've got a back line where De Ligt is fit, where Martinez is fit, where Yoro is fit, Dallow's fit, obviously we hope Shaw gets back as soon as possible. We've got a proper left back available to us, be it Shaw, be it Martinez, be it Mazraoui, be it Malacia, be it Harry Amas. If we get the defence sorted, we'll do much better. Casemiro's had a great pre-season. Toby Collier looks good. Mainoo's back. Bruno's back. Rashford's looked awful, but Ahmad and Garnacho are firing. I've put that on there. The youngsters are going to get more game time this season, and I think they're going to excel. Look at what Arsenal have done by bringing through their youngsters. That's what we're trying to replicate, and I think Ten Hag is getting the backing to do it. So I'm optimistic. I have put us in fourth, mainly due to how well we played in the Community Shield. If I'd have done this video before the Community Shield, it would have been Newcastle 4th, Villa 5th, Man United 6th. But I've flipped Newcastle and Man United since that Community Shield, and I've still left Villa in 5th. So we'll see. I'm positive. I'm hopeful. It was a bad pre-season, but it was a good Community Shield, albeit that we lost. The new signings are coming in, and I'm positive it's going to be a good season for Manchester United once again. In third, I've got Liverpool. Obviously, they finished third last season. The three or four, should I say, biggest things going against them are all there. Klopp has gone. Slots unproven in major European leagues. They have signed no one. And their key players are aging. Salah's now well over 30. Van Dijk's now well over 30. Alisson's now over 30, albeit he is a goalkeeper. They're still lacking a proper holding midfielder. Their only real recognised one is Endo. He is also now over 30. So key players are aging, but I don't see anything wrong with actually backing a manager with the squad he's got available to them. And if you look at it, they have been completely unbeaten in pre-season, which have included victories over Manchester United and Arsenal. They're rivals for these spots in the Premier League. Not to mention, they have got some fantastic opening fixtures, Liverpool. They should be winning probably 4 or 5 of their opening 6. Their toughest game is obviously away to Manchester United, but their record against Manchester United speaks for itself. And as I've already mentioned, they beat us last week quite comfortably in pre-season without a lot of their star players. So I still think Liverpool are going to have a good season, whether or not they make new signings or not. But for me, it'll only be enough for third, because in second, I have once again got Arsenal. And I think if anyone's going to challenge City, it is going to be Arsenal. They've challenged them the last 2 years. They've finished second the last 2 seasons. Last season, they finished 2 points behind them. The season before that, they finished 5 points behind them. So if they close the same gap again, this time they finish 1 point above them. I'm sure that's what Arsenal fans will be hoping for. They've also strengthened their squad. It looks like the Mikel Merino deal is almost done. I think the Calafiori deal is a very good one. I still think they might need a proper out-and-out striker, but Havertz has looked good in pre-season. Gabriel Jesus has looked good in pre-season. And obviously we all know the exploits of like Bukayo Saka and Martin Odegaard, etc., etc., etc. The one thing I would say about Arsenal is they have got the worst run of away fixtures at the start of the season, other than maybe Brentford. They play all of the big teams away at the start of this Premier League season. It's the right time to play them, in my opinion. If you can get the statements out early, you can really stamp a marker down for your credentials to win a Premier League title. We all know that historically Manchester City don't start a season well. So if Arsenal can get through those first few fixtures, they really put themselves in good stead to go for it once again. But ultimately, for me, I don't think it's going to be enough. But as you can see by the final point, as always with Arsenal, they'll be trusting the process. And will the process finally be enough to see them clinch the Premier League title? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. And that is going to round off this predictions video. I will once again bring up the reminder that if you want to get yourselves involved, you can do so by clicking the link in the description in the pinned comment of this video, which is to go onto FUTMob and design your own Premier League table just like this one, where you will be able to compete against me in my mini league to determine who at the end of the season predicted the table in the best possible manner. And of course, a reminder once again that when it comes to Friday and the start of the Premier League season, I am running my own predictions mini league on Sky Sports Super 6, where you can of course compete against me and a bunch of my other mates and other people on this YouTube community to see who is the ultimate footballing predictor. Thank you very much for watching as always. Feel free to take one last look at my Premier League table for the upcoming 24-25 season. Thank you very much for watching once again. I'll be back on Friday morning for Premier League predictions game week 1. I'll see you there.